Today I'm getting ready to add an additional battery to our system. You can see our current battery here. This is a large battery pack. It's made of 16 individual cells. Each is 3.2 volts, which adds up to a 48 volt system. It's actually about 52 volts. And the storage capacity of this battery is almost 14 amp hours, just a little less, 13 point something. And I'll be adding another one just like this today, so we'll be doubling our battery storage capacity to a little over 27 amp hours, which should be quite comfortable for us. We haven't had desperate need of more battery capacity. We've never had to run the generator except to do welding or something like that. And we've only ran out of power and had the system shut down on low battery like twice. So it hasn't really been an issue, but it would definitely be nice to have more battery storage capacity, just extra comfort room. So we bought these batteries, and in these boxes here, you can see these are our 16 new cells. Actually, they're not quite new. They were new when we bought them, but they've been sitting here for a year and a half, waiting for us to find the time to work on them, and now is finally the time. I'm glad to be able to get to this and install these batteries that have been waiting on my attention. And if you look over to the right here, you can see the supplies that I've got all laid out. I've tried to get all the tools together, the wiring ready, and the base ready to go ahead and build this new battery. The first thing I need to do is to move the old battery over. I want to set these two side by side, so I just needed to turn this one and to make room for the new one. This is really heavy. I can barely move it. If you can imagine trying to move about 5 car batteries at once, that's how heavy this thing is, so it's extremely heavy. I've managed to scoot it over, and I've got all the wires situated to where nothing is being pulled. And now I'm starting to unbox the new batteries and put them on the new base. I built the base the same as the last one. I just wanted it to be a 2x4 base with a piece of plywood on top and foam underneath to give it a little insulation from the floor so it wouldn't get so cold in the wintertime. These are EVE batteries that we ordered from China, and they came very well packed. They're double boxed with a very nice thick molded foam all the way around. As I put these batteries down on the base, I'm putting them in the correct orientation with dividers in between. I have a reference over to the side there, that folder gives me a reference on how to place these to make sure I have the positive and negative terminals in the right place as I put them down. And I've got my reference material from the DIY Solar Forum. It's really good. As I place these, I'm putting a plastic divider in between. It's not necessary, it's not required from the factory that you do this, but it's just an extra precaution that I'm using. When deciding on the material to use for these dividers, I was looking for inexpensive options, and what I settled on was cutting boards from the dollar store. I was able to get several dividers from each cutting board, and they were like 50 cents each, and so it was a very inexpensive option. On the first battery that I built, I used some vinyl sheeting that I got from a friend, but I'm all out of it, and so I had to find something else, and this cutting board should be a good durable material. Once I double-checked the orientation of all the batteries, I went through and straightened everything out to get it all nice and neat and even. As you notice there, I'm leaving a gap in the middle, and that's because I'm going to be compressing them next. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm putting on the end boards, and then I'm putting 6 pieces of all thread through, 2 in the middle and 2 on each side, and I'll be using that all thread to tighten and compress the batteries to pull them all together and keep them from expanding. The factory does recommend this step. It's good for the batteries to be held closely together so that as they charge, they will expand and contract a little bit as they gain and lose power, and that could cause the connections to loosen if you're using bar terminals, and so they recommend compression, and they say it adds a lot of longevity to the batteries, a lot of lifespan. Now that I have everything all put together, I need to actually compress the batteries, and it's important that you compress them the right amount. You don't want too much or too little. The way that I do it is to watch the lock washer that I have on either side of that all thread and tighten it down into where that lock washer is completely compressed, and then go just a little bit past that, and I find that gives me about the right amount of compression.
There you go. Oh my goodness.
I don't want the battery itself moving. It's so freaking heavy. You can't help. I just need to work it back. These batteries are really heavy. I can barely move it into place. So if you're going to be building one of these, take weight into consideration. You're probably going to want to build it in place. And if you're going to be using a shelf of some kind, it needs to be really heavy duty. I couldn't build this one exactly in place. I ended up doing it a couple feet away, as you saw, because I had to be able to reach the nuts and the bolts on the back side. And also I didn't want to be building it right next to live components. That's why I built it a few feet away, but it was really hard just to move it a couple feet into place. This battery will tie into the same positive and negative bus bars that the other battery is connected to. It will also have its own breaker, which I'm installing here, and its own battery management system, which I'll be installing next. As a quick disclaimer, I'm not an electrician and I'm not a professional, and there's a lot of dangerous things going on here with electricity, and I'm not going into in this video all the safety considerations that are in play here, so please do your own research, take your own precautions. I'm just showing you quickly how I did it, but this is very dangerous electricity here. At this point, I decided to go ahead and put a cover on the previous battery so I don't accidentally touch something. I needed to reposition the BMS on that battery a little bit, do a few things, and now I'm getting the BMS for the new battery positioned and ready for the connections. I'm not doing any of the connections yet because the system is still energized. Here I'm positioning the BMS. My main consideration is that all those little red wires that come out the bottom, they need to be able to reach all the cells in this battery, so it has to be positioned pretty close but still out of the way. Let this be scary. These have to go in first, and then I can put the wires on for the BMS. I'm going to sequence. Here I'm installing the bus bars. These are from the factory and they're a nickel-coated copper. Once these are all laid out and in place, I will put the wires from the BMS on and then I'll tighten everything down. Now I have both sides done, but I still need to connect the two sides, and I don't have a pre-made bus bar for that, so I'm going to have to make one myself. I ordered a piece of 1 inch by 1/8 inch by 12 inches long copper strip from eBay, and now I just need to cut it down to the proper length and drill 2 holes to match up with the terminals on either battery. I used a set of dial calipers to get the dimension between the terminals, and I transferred that to this bar, and then I center punched and drilled out the holes. Once that was done, I got a file out and filed off the burr. I want to make sure I have a good smooth contact. And so I wanted to make sure that burr was completely removed before installing these. So that is looking good. I printed out the manual for the BMS, and so I have it right here for quick reference. I need to connect wires from the BMS to each cell of the battery, and I'm carefully studying how to do that here. Black is a negative, it ends on a positive, cell 16. Earlier, I installed the wire terminal connections on each one of the little red wires so that I could easily connect it to the terminals on the battery. The BMS is a very important part of the system. It will look at each of the cells. There's a little red wire that will go to each individual cell, and it will monitor the voltages of the different cells. And if one of those starts to get a little out of whack or a little different from the other cells, it will actively balance that. So it has an active balancing feature where it can send up to 2 amps of power to individual cells to equalize the power between the cells, and that balancing gives a lot more longevity to the battery. It will also fault if one of the cells goes bad and shut down the system so I can replace the individual cells. So it is an invaluable component in this system. And here I am using a hydraulic crimper to make the wire connectors for the new components. I'm using a number 2 copper wire here, so it's a very good heavy-duty wire, and these lugs are really hard to compress properly if you don't have a hydraulic crimper, so this tool works great. I want all these wires to be as short as possible, so they're all custom made for each location. I just have a roll of wire that I cut to length, strip the ends down, and then I compress the lugs on with this nice little tool, and then I put a collar or a sleeve over that I can melt into place with the lighter that forms a good seal over the connection. It's always surprising how many of these you need. I think I ended up making like 10 of these, and so that takes a lot of lugs. It seems like I'm always buying more lugs, 10 with 2 lugs per side, so that's like 20 lugs that I needed for this. So make sure you stock up on those before you get started. It takes a lot of little wire pieces. I now have all the wires connected to the battery, so I'm ready to go through and tighten everything down. There's a lot of bolts that I need to tighten here, and it's important to get them as tight as possible, but not too tight. You don't want to strip them out. I'm sure the factory probably gives some kind of a torque specification. I'm not using that here, I'm just doing it by hand. I have quite a bit of experience and a good feel for this type of thing, but if you have concerns, then you can probably look up the torque specifications and use that. I just want to make sure everything's good and snug before I move on to the next step. All right, I have the second battery all built. It's ready to go. I have it connected to the BMS. All the little wires are connected. and that is connected to its own breaker, but I haven't connected the breaker yet, so it's still totally separated from the system. At this point, I'm ready to go ahead and check the voltage on this battery, and then I'll check the voltage on my current in-service battery, compare the two, and see how close they are. I need to get them within half a volt before I can connect them together. 268. 5395, so I'm about 1.3 difference. So I need to bring this one down some. Alright, so I have 52.5-ish. On the other one, 53.6. I'm about a volt high. I need to bring down my current battery by about a volt before I can combine the two together. And so in order to do that, I've disconnected the solar panel so I don't have any power coming in. And we're going to go ahead and turn on a pretty big power user. We're going to turn on the hot water heater and let it draw this battery down until it's in the right voltage. And then I'll shut the system down and make the connection. April went over to the house to flip the water heater on so that we could equalize the batteries, and while that is working, I'm modifying a couple of lugs. I needed a 3/8 inch hole instead of a 5/16, so I just drilled it out. It didn't take long to finish up making those last wires that'll connect the new components to the bus bars, and then I'm ready to check the batteries. It looks like we're close enough to being equalized, and so we're ready to shut the system down and make the connections. Balances, but we're close enough, I would say. Mm-hmm. All the other breakers off, basically. That's it. We do not. Okay, so it's safe to work. I'll still not touch both, but. Well, I've opened all the breakers, removed the protective covers, and double-checked that there's no power, so I'm ready to go ahead and connect the new components. I've already made all the connections up to the breaker, so all I need to do is run the wire from the breaker over to the bus bars. I'm using a 200 amp DC breaker, and I'm running 2-gauge copper wire over and making the connections to the bus bar with a 3/8 inch bolt. At first we forgot to cover the new battery while I was doing this work, which was a mistake, and when we remembered, we put some cardboard over the top so that in case I dropped a screwdriver or something down on them, they wouldn't arc across. Once everything was connected and tight, I put back on the homemade cover that we always keep over these bus bars just to keep someone from accidentally touching them. We also always keep a cover on the batteries at all times that we're not actually working on it, just to keep some kind of an accidental contact that could cause a spark or something across the terminals. While the system was down, I wanted to make one slight modification to the existing older battery, and that is to remove the Victron shunt. We had originally, actually a little bit after we started the system originally, we installed a Victron shunt and didn't find it to be very useful, so I'm removing it here and connecting the BMS directly to the bus bar through the breaker. The Victron shunt worked fine, but we really didn't need it since we got basically the same information from the BMS, and the Victron also needed to be reset on a weekly basis or it got out of sync, and so we just removed it because we didn't need it. While it was down, I wanted to recheck all the connections and make sure everything was tight. So I'm going over the old battery here and checking all the connections. Everything ended up being good, but it's recommended that you check your connections once every 3 to 6 months. And I haven't done it since we installed our system originally. We also checked the connection on the controllers, all of the breakers, and other components in the system. I did find one loose connection on this particular breaker. It was one of the breakers below the controller. But that was the only one, everything else was still tight. I put the cover back on the battery as soon as I could. Those were always hot or energized, even when the system is down. And then I went about removing the cover from the breaker box so that I could check all the connections in there as well. Everything looked good in the control panel. I didn't find any loose connections in there. Once that was complete, I was ready to move on to my last task before re-energizing the system, and that is getting ready to connect the generator in power. Our inverter has the ability to take power in from a generator, convert it to DC, and recharge the batteries. In order to do that, I need to connect the wiring and I need to have a breaker, an AC breaker, for 220 volts, and I need to get that connected and get all that wiring done so that in the future, if I want to use the generator to power up the batteries, I can. Fortunately, it's not something that we have needed in the past, but it'd be nice to have the option in the future. With that done, I reinstalled the cover to the breaker panel, and I'm ready to go ahead and start up the BMS on the new battery. I'm getting ready to start up the system again, but before I could, I had to restart the BMS on the first battery. I was hoping that it wouldn't go to sleep, but it did, and this particular BMS has a strange startup sequence. You have to show 3 volts more on the inlet side of the BMS than the outlet side of the BMS, and so I have to create a little jumper wire with a little battery, a little 9-volt battery, and jump those across so it sees more voltage on one side than the other. It's a huge pain, but that's the only way to wake up these BMSs and get them started. Anyway, I did that here and I have the first battery started. Unfortunately, I checked voltages and realized that my old battery was still a little bit too much higher than the new battery to go ahead and make those connections. There's still too much a differential in voltage, so I needed to start my system back up and pull down the voltage on my old battery a little bit more so that I could bring the new battery online. And so that's what I'm doing here. I'm restarting the system. There's a special procedure that I have to go through to restart the inverter. I've got the inverter going, and then I realized I needed to actually shut off the voltage coming in from the solar panels so that it would draw down the battery.
Mm-hmm.
I want to leave it running, but I don't want it charging.
Oh.
It's building up our differential. It's already a little high. Once that was done, we turned on some power users and put the cover back on the battery so we could wait a little while for it to draw the battery down just a little bit more. After a short wait, the batteries were equalized and I was ready to bring the new BMS online. So I'm jumping across here with that 9-volt battery, waking up this new BMS, and now I'll be able to go into it with my phone and check everything out. Here I'm checking the voltage with a meter and comparing that to the voltage that the BMS sees and making sure that it doesn't need to be calibrated. It all looks good. And it's seeing the correct amount of battery cells. So this is looking great. They're all pretty balanced. Yeah, the lowest one is 3.29 and this is 3.293, so we got 0.002 difference between all the cells, very balanced. Came from the factory that way. That all checked out, so I was ready to flip the breaker to connect the battery to the rest of the system. I didn't see a big surge there and didn't throw any faults, so that all went really well. Then all I needed to do was to close the breakers to bring the solar juice back into the system, and everything is turned on and working properly. It all looks good so far. Okay, that was easier than expected. Very pleasant. Turning everything on. No status. Okay. It's all good. Everything's on. Charge, discharge, balance. It's charging. It's all very happy. My last task was to set up the parameters in the new BMS to match the other one. So I just had to connect to the old BMS on my phone, write down or screenshot those parameters and transfer them to the new BMS. Took just a little while, but that's the last step in the process. Well, the new battery addition is complete. Everything went really well. The part I was most nervous about was the addition of the BMS. They can be kind of tricky to get them woke up and set up. I was also a little worried about a surge of power when I connected the new battery to the old battery, and that equalization process. Fortunately, that was rather instantaneous and it didn't trigger a short, or it didn't sense a short. Sometimes the BMS, when they see a big influx of power or outflux of power, will think it's a short and shut things off. That didn't happen, so it all went really well. Everything is back up and running, so I'm about done with this. I just need to create a cover for the new battery, insulate it all, and then I need to finish up the generator connection, which I have a little bit of work to do outside, but I can do that with the system running. So I'm good to go for now. So I went and gathered up some materials that we already had just laying around to build the box out of. It was a simple box with a wood frame, and I insulated it on the outside. And then I placed some leftover pieces of cement fiberboard over the top to give it some fire protection. It's really nice to get that second battery installed. I feel like it's always been the weak point of our system. We have great solar panel production, and our inverter does everything we need, and so the second set of batteries gives us all the storage capacity we need. The only other addition we might want to make to the system as a supplement is a good-sized power station that we can have on hand for emergency use and could also be charged by our solar panels. As far as costs go, these batteries cost us $2,400 shipped to us, and we have about $60 in wire and fittings and everything added to that. That's about twice what we paid for our first set of batteries. When we ordered the first set of batteries, the market conditions were really good and they were extraordinarily reasonably priced at that time. Soon after, the market changed, shipping costs skyrocketed with COVID and other factors, and batteries became a lot more expensive.
So here's a little update on the solar before we end this video. So I'm in the house here. There's our solar panels. So we just had 4 days of cloudy weather, 2 days with absolutely no sun, and then 2 partially cloudy days. We were pretty careful about our usage. We just kind of ran lights and just the necessary things, charge devices, all that kind of stuff. So we made it through. Plus we have some company here visiting. And then I'll do a little update here on the temperatures. So after those cloudy days, we did drop down the coldest we've ever been. So 61.9. And we're at 72.5 right now. We've got sun coming in, warming up the house. Very cold few days here. Highs in the 50s, lows in the teens. We got down to 15 degrees last night, and it's supposed to be colder tonight. So enjoying staying nice and cozy in our house here.